I went bankrupt, and my husband handed me divorce papers before the ink on the court filing was even dry. When I begged my own family for a place to sleep out of the rain, my stepmother slammed the door right in my face and told me to take an Uber to the slums. My mother-in-law kicked me out of my own penthouse, leaving me with nothing but a single trash bag and a $50 bill thrown at me like garbage. The only person who sheltered me that night was my younger brother, who gave up his only bed so I could rest. What none of them knew, not my treacherous husband, not my greedy stepmother, and certainly not my arrogant mother-in-law, was that my bankruptcy was entirely fake. The next morning, karma hit them so hard they lost everything while I walked away with a $150 million empire. My name is Valerie, and I am 34 years old. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled their lives overnight, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe that the best revenge is massive, undeniable success. The dull thud of a heavy black trash bag hitting the marble floor of the elevator lobby echoed through the quiet penthouse corridor. I stood there, rain dripping from my coat, staring at the plastic bag that contained the last 5 years of my life. My husband Julian stood in the doorway of our Buckhead penthouse, his arms crossed over his expensive tailored shirt. His face, the handsome face that had charmed me into marrying him 3 years ago, was twisted into a sneer of pure disgust. He did not even wait for me to speak. He simply raised his hand and threw a thick stack of papers right at my chest. The pages scattered across the floor, landing next to the trash bag. Even in the dim light of the hallway, I could see the bold black letters at the top of the first page. Petition for dissolution of marriage. His signature was already scrawled at the bottom, aggressive and final. My lawyers looked into your little situation, Valerie, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. Chapter 11. Bankruptcy. You are completely wiped out. Millions of dollars in debt, and your company is being liquidated as we speak. You really thought you could hide that from me. I looked from the papers back up to his face. I did not cry, I did not scream. 5 years of building a financial technology company from the ground up had taught me how to keep my composure when the room was on fire. I had spent countless nights working until dawn to create a payment gateway that actually served minority-owned businesses, while Julian spent his days schmoozing at his high-end public relations firm, climbing the corporate ladder on the back of my financial stability. Now that he believed that stability was gone, he was cutting his losses faster than a sinking ship. I am not hiding anything from you, Julian, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. The company is undergoing a restructuring process. It is a strategic financial move. He let out a harsh, barking laugh that made me flinch inwardly. A strategic move. That is what you tech people call failing these days. You are a joke, Valerie. I told you for years that you did not know how to manage your image. You refused to listen to my advice. You refused to let me handle your public relations. And now look at you. You are a bankrupt loser with a mountain of bad debt. I am a public relations director for the top firm in Atlanta. I manage the image of millionaires and politicians. I absolutely refuse to be tethered to a sinking anchor like you. He stepped forward, kicking one of the stray divorce pages closer to my foot. Sign it, he demanded. My lawyer expedited the paperwork. I want you out of my life, off my insurance, and completely untethered from my assets before your creditors come knocking at my door. Oh, and I locked you out of the joint checking accounts this afternoon. I will not have you draining my money to pay your failed business loans. I stared at the man I had promised to spend the rest of my life with. When we met, he had been so supportive, so enamored with my ambition. But over the years, as my company grew and my income eclipsed his, the support morphed into resentment. He hated that I was the primary breadwinner. He hated that the penthouse we lived in was paid for mostly by my success, even though his name was on the lease to protect his fragile ego. Now, the second he perceived a threat to his luxurious lifestyle, he was throwing me out into the hallway like the trash bag he had just dropped at my feet. I slowly knelt down and picked up the signature page. My hand did not shake. The cold marble seeped through my wet jeans, but I barely felt it. I was calculating. I was processing, He wanted out. He wanted to protect his precious assets and his flawless image. He was so terrified of being associated with a failure that he was eagerly signing away all his rights to anything that had my name on it. "You realize what this means?" I asked quietly, looking up at him. "If I sign this right now with this specific expedited clause your lawyer drafted, we are done. You walk away with what is yours and I walk away with what is mine. No alimony, no division of future assets." Julian scoffed, rolling his eyes as if I were the stupidest person he had ever met. "Your future assets are negative $3 million, Valerie. Yes, I want a clean break. I am keeping the cars and the furniture in the penthouse. You can take your cheap clothes and whatever is left in your personal checking account. Just sign the paper and get out of my sight." I pulled a pen from my purse. I did not argue about the cars. I did not argue about the custom furniture I had paid for. I placed the paper against the wall and signed my name with smooth, deliberate strokes. I handed the packet back to him. He snatched it from my hand with a victorious smirk, entirely unaware of the catastrophic mistake he had just made. Before I could bend down to pick up the trash bag, the heavy mahogany door of the master bedroom swung open. Julian's mother, Sylvia, stepped out into the foyer. She was wearing a silk robe that I had bought for her last Mother's Day, and holding a vintage leather handbag that had also been a gift from me. Sylvia had always fancied herself a part of the Atlanta elite. She was the head of the church choir, a prominent member of several exclusive social clubs, and a woman who had never hidden her disdain for my working-class roots. She walked up behind her son, looking down her nose at me with an expression of absolute triumph. "I told you, Julian," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "I told you the very first day you brought her home. You can take a girl out of the rough side of South Atlanta, but you cannot teach her how to sustain real wealth. Her kind always ends up right back where they started, broke, desperate, and begging for handouts." I stood up slowly, picking up my trash bag of belongings. "Sylvia," I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm, "I bought that bag you are holding." She clutched the purse tighter to her chest and sneered. "Consider it compensation for the embarrassment you have brought to my son. Now be a good little failure and leave before I have the building concierge escort you off the premises. We have important guests arriving tomorrow, and we cannot have a bankrupt vagrant loitering in our hallway." Julian wrapped his arm around his mother's shoulders, looking at me as if I were a stranger he had caught trespassing. "You heard her, Valerie. The marriage is over. Your business is dead. Leave the keys on the console and take the service elevator down." I reached into my pocket, pulled out the heavy brass key to the penthouse, and tossed it onto the entryway table. It landed with a sharp clink that echoed in the tense air. I did not shed a single tear. I did not offer them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I just looked at my soon-to-be ex-husband and his arrogant mother, memorizing the smug satisfaction on their faces. I wanted to burn this exact image into my mind so I would never forget it. "Have a wonderful evening, Julian," I said softly. I turned my back on them, dragging my black plastic bag toward the service elevator. Behind me, the heavy penthouse door slammed shut, echoing like a gunshot in the empty corridor. The service elevator groaned as it descended, carrying me and my single trash bag of belongings away from the penthouse, away from the marriage I had poured 5 years into. I leaned against the cold metal wall, the events of the last 10 minutes replaying in my mind. Julian's sneer, his mother's cruelty, the sheer speed with which they had discarded me the moment my financial value came into question. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me from my thoughts. It was a notification from my banking app. "Your joint checking account. Access has been revoked." A second later, another notification popped up. "Your joint savings account. Access has been revoked." Julian wasn't wasting any time. He had locked me out completely. Just as he promised, leaving me with whatever was in my personal account, which wasn't much. I had transferred almost everything into the business accounts months ago to keep the company afloat during the restructuring phase. The elevator doors chimed open to the basement parking garage. The air was damp and smelled of exhaust. I walked toward my car, a reliable but unremarkable Honda Civic that looked entirely out of place next to the rows of Mercedes and Range Rovers belonging to the other residents. I tossed the trash bag into the trunk and got into the driver's seat. The engine sputtered to life, a reassuring sound amidst the chaos. I didn't know where I was going at first. I just drove, letting the rain wash the windshield, the wipers swishing back and forth in a hypnotic rhythm as I navigated the slick streets of Buckhead. The reality of my situation began to settle in. I was technically homeless, officially bankrupt on paper, and locked out of the majority of my assets. I needed a place to stay, a sanctuary where I could regroup and execute the next phase of my plan. I scrolled through my contacts. Considering my options, I had friends, of course, but most of them were connected to Julian or my business partners who were currently in the dark about the true nature of the restructuring. I needed someone who would ask no questions, someone who wouldn't judge my current state. My thumb hovered over Malik's name. My younger brother was rough around the edges, a far cry from the polished circles I moved in, but he was fiercely loyal and he owed me. I had paid for his HVAC certification program when our parents refused, ensuring he had a stable career. But calling him meant admitting I needed help, acknowledging the crack in my carefully constructed facade of success. The strong black woman trope, the expectation that I could handle everything on my own, that I was invincible. It was a heavy burden to carry, and right now, I felt the weight of it pressing down on me. Before I called Malik, I needed to make one stop, a detour, driven by a mix of desperation and a lingering, perhaps foolish hope that family still meant something. I typed the address into my GPS, the destination, a familiar house in a neighborhood I hadn't visited in years, my childhood home now occupied by my stepmother Brenda and her son Terrence. After my father passed away, Brenda had inherited the house, a point of contention that had widened the rift between us. But tonight, pride was a luxury I couldn't afford. I needed a roof over my head, and despite our differences, Brenda was technically family. The drive to the suburbs took 30 minutes, the rain unrelenting as I pulled into the driveway. The house was ablaze with light cars lining the street. It appeared Brenda was hosting one of her church auxiliary meetings, a gathering of the neighborhood's self-appointed moral guardians. I parked down the street, not wanting to draw attention to my arrival. I grabbed my purse, leaving the trash bag in the trunk, and walked toward the front door. The sound of laughter and chatter drifted through the windows, the scent of baked goods and expensive perfume hanging in the air. I took a deep breath, smoothing my damp hair, and rang the doorbell. The laughter inside paused, replaced by the sound of footsteps approaching. The door swung open, revealing Brenda, her smile frozen as she registered my presence. "Valerie," she said, her voice tight, a mixture of surprise and disapproval coloring her tone. "What are you doing here? You look like a drowned rat." I forced a smile, trying to project a calm. "I didn't feel hello." "Brenda, I know it's late, but I need a favor. I ran into some unexpected trouble, and I need a place to stay just for a few nights." Brenda's eyes darted past me, scanning the street for my car. When she saw the empty driveway, her frown deepened. "Where is Julian? Why isn't he with you?" "Julian and I are getting a divorce," I said, keeping my voice steady. "The paperwork was filed this evening. I don't have access to the penthouse or our accounts. I just need the guest room until I can sort things out." Brenda stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door partially shut behind her, the warm light from the hallway spilling onto the wet concrete. "Valerie, you know I can't do that," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "The church ladies are church. Inside, we are discussing the upcoming charity gala. What will they think if they see you showing up here looking like a vagrant asking for charity?" "They don't need to see me," I reasoned. "I can go straight to the guest room. I just need a bed." "Brenda, I have nowhere else to go." Brenda sighed, a sound of exasperated patience. "You have always been so dramatic, Valerie. A divorce doesn't mean you are suddenly homeless. You have money. You have that tech company of yours. Rent a hotel room." "I can't," I said, the frustration finally leaking into my voice. "The company is undergoing restructuring. My accounts are frozen. I literally have nothing right now." Brenda's eyes widened, the implication dawning on her. Restructuring, she repeated, a knowing glint, replacing the surprise. You mean bankrupt? I heard rumors from Terrence that your little startup was struggling, but I didn't realize it was this bad. I am not bankrupt, I clarified. The restructuring is a strategic move. It's complicated, but I assure you it's temporary. Temporary or not, I cannot have a bankrupt divorced woman disrupting my home, Brenda said, her tone hardening. Terrence is entertaining potential investors for his new cryptocurrency venture in the den. Right now, he cannot afford the embarrassment of having his sister show up, begging for a handout. A handout? I repeated the word bitter on my tongue. I paid the mortgage on this house for 3 years after Dad died. Brenda, I kept a roof over your head when you were struggling, and now you won't even give me a bed for the night. Brenda's face flushed, anger replacing the forced politeness that was your choice. Valerie, your father would have wanted you to support your family, but you have always been selfish, always putting your career before your responsibilities as a wife and a daughter. Look where it got you. The front door opened wider and Ashley Terrence's wife stepped out. She was holding a glass of wine, her blonde hair perfectly styled, a stark contrast to my disheveled appearance. Ashley had always delighted in pointing out our differences, her subtle digs wrapped in a veneer of southern charm. Valerie, what a surprise, Ashley drawled, taking a sip of her wine. Brenda told me you were here? Is everything all right? You look terrible. I am fine, Ashley, I said, ignoring her condescending tone. I was just leaving. Ashley smiled a thin, humorless curve of her lips. Oh, don't be like that, Valerie. We are family after all. But Brenda is right. Terrence is very stressed about this new venture. He needs a peaceful environment. You know how sensitive he is to negative energy. Negative energy, I repeated incredulously. I am his sister. I am asking for a place to sleep, not a business consultation. Ashley sighed, adjusting the delicate gold chain around her neck. I know you are used to being the strong, independent black woman. Valerie, always hustling, always proving yourself. But maybe this is a sign that you need to slow down. You focused so much on being a boss that you forgot how to be a wife. Maybe if you had paid more attention to Julian, you wouldn't be standing on our porch in the rain. The audacity of her comment left me temporarily speechless. Ashley, a woman who had never worked a day in her life, whose entire existence was funded by the erratic success of my brother's questionable business ventures, was lecturing me on my career choices before I could formulate a response. Terrence appeared in the doorway, his face flushed, his eyes darting nervously between me and the driveway. "What's going on out here?" he demanded, looking past me. "Valerie, what are you doing here? I need a place to stay." "Terrence," I said, turning my attention to my brother. "Julian threw me out. The company is restructuring my accounts, are frozen. I just need the guest room for a few days." Terrence's expression hardened, a mirror image of Brenda's earlier dismissal. "Look, Val, I can't. I have investors inside, important people. I can't have them. See my sister showing up, looking like she just crawled out of a dumpster. It's bad for my brand. Your brand." Scoffed, the anger finally rising to the surface. "You run a cryptocurrency startup out of your mother's basement. Terrence, what brand are you protecting?" Terrence's face turned crimson. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a crumpled $50 bill. He shoved it toward me, taking the money. "Take an Uber. Go to a motel. I don't care. Just leave. You are ruining my networking event." I stared at the bill in his outstretched hand. The $50 a pathetic offering, a symbol of their complete disregard for my well-being. I didn't take the money. I looked at Brenda, who refused to meet my eyes, at Ashley, who watched with a smug expression, and finally at Terrence, my brother, the golden boy, who was more concerned about his imaginary investors than his sister standing in the rain. "Keep your money, Terrence," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "I wouldn't want to bankrupt your precious startup." I turned and walked down the steps, the rain washing away the last traces of familial obligation I had offered them the chance to be decent human beings, and they had failed spectacularly. The door slammed shut behind me, a definitive end to that chapter of my life. I walked back to my car, my clothes soaked, my spirit bruised but not broken. I pulled out my phone, the screen illuminating my wet face. I dialed the number, the only number left. Malik picked up on the third ring, his voice groggy from sleep. "Yeah, Val. What's up, Malik? I need you," I said, the tears finally threatening to fall. "I need a place to stay tonight, without hesitation, without questions." Malik responded, "Where are you? I'll come get you." I gave him the address, my voice thick with emotion. "I'll wait in the car." I hung up the phone, staring at the dark street. The rain continued to fall, a steady drumbeat against the roof of the car. I had been discarded by my husband, humiliated by my mother-in-law, and rejected by my stepfamily. I was alone, broke and sitting in a wet car in the middle of the night. But as I looked at my phone at the single text message waiting in my outbox, a cold, calculating calm settled over me. The text was addressed to my lead legal counsel, the architect of the restructuring plan. It contained a single sentence: "Execute the acquisition agreement tomorrow morning. The world would wake up to the news of my company's $150 million buyout, and the people who had treated me like garbage tonight would realize the catastrophic magnitude of their mistake. Karma wasn't just coming, it was arriving with a balance sheet, and it was going to cost them everything." Malik's battered Ford truck pulled up behind my Civic, its headlights cutting through the relentless Atlanta rain. He jumped out before the truck was even fully parked, his heavy work boots splashing in the deep puddles. He did not care about the downpour or the dark grease stains on his uniform. He just rushed over and wrapped his thick arms around me, pulling me into a fierce hug that smelled of ozone and hard physical labor. A smell that instantly reminded me of our late father. I finally let the tears fall, holding on to his jacket, not crying for the husband who had discarded me, or the stepfamily who had turned me away, but out of pure, exhausting relief that someone in this world actually loved me unconditionally. We left my car parked on the dark street, and I climbed into the passenger seat of his truck, the heater blasting warm, dry air against my freezing skin. Malik did not press for details right away. He just drove, navigating the slick, wet highways toward his small apartment on the south side of the city, giving me the silent space I desperately needed when we finally walked through his front door. The contrast between Julian's cold, sterile penthouse and Malik's cramped, lived-in space was staggering. It was not much, just a modest one-bedroom unit with faded carpet and a handed-down sofa. But to me, it was a fortress of genuine loyalty. He immediately went to the small kitchen, pulling out a clean towel and heating up a pot of water on the stove. "Sit down, Val," he said, his voice thick with a deep protective anger. "You are shaking. What did that pristine suit-wearing coward do to you?" I wrapped the warm towel around my shoulders and told him everything. The fake bankruptcy, the expedited divorce papers, the frozen bank accounts, and the ultimate cruel rejection at Brenda's house. Earlier that night, Malik clenched his jaw, his rough hands gripping the edge of the kitchen counter, tight enough to turn his knuckles pale. "They are all blind, Valerie," he said fiercely, stepping forward to hand me a steaming mug of tea. "You are the smartest person in any room you walk into. You sacrificed your own youth to make sure I got through trade school, to make sure Dad had a decent funeral. They looked down on us because we had to claw our way up from the dirt. But they have absolutely no idea what you are really made of." I took a slow sip of the tea, letting the warmth seep deep into my aching chest. I smiled up at him, my eyes catching the faint glow of my laptop screen resting on his small dining table. "They are about to find out, Malik," I told him, my voice steadying into a cold resolve. "You might want to call out of work tomorrow, because our lives are going to change the second the sun comes up." He insisted I take his actual bed while he slept on the cramped living room sofa. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, and watching the digital clock on his nightstand shift, minute by excruciating minute, waiting for the exact moment the financial markets opened at 8 a.m. sharp. My phone began to vibrate, not just a single notification, but a continuous, relentless buzz that rattled against the wooden table. I sat up and opened the screen. The Wall Street Journal and Forbes had just pushed their morning headlines across every major financial news feed in the country. Historic fintech acquisition, female founder Valerie orchestrates. Brilliant corporate restructuring leading to a $150 million cash buyout by global payment giant. The engine of my old Honda Civic sputtered as I turned the key. The sound, a harsh contrast to the silent luxury of the Buckhead parking garage I had just left behind. The rain battered the windshield in heavy, relentless sheets, mirroring the chaos Julian and his mother had just orchestrated. I put the car in drive and pulled out onto the slick city streets, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. I had no access to my checking accounts, no credit cards, and no husband. The digital numbers on the dashboard clock glowed green, reminding me how late it was getting. The cold seeped through my wet clothes, chilling me to the bone. I needed a place to sleep, a safe harbor to wait out the next few hours until the financial markets opened and my restructuring plan finally executed itself. I had always prided myself on my independence, on being the strong black woman who handled every crisis without asking for help. But tonight, my options were deliberately severed. I drove south, leaving the glittering skyline of Midtown behind and navigating toward the familiar suburban streets of my childhood. The house my father had purchased years ago, a sturdy brick structure sitting on a wide corner lot, was now entirely controlled by my stepmother Brenda. When my father passed away, he left the property to her, a decision that had slowly eroded whatever fragile bond we once shared. But despite her hypocritical nature, she was technically family, and tonight I just needed a roof over my head. As I turned onto the familiar tree-lined street, I immediately noticed the line of expensive vehicles parked along the curbs. The driveway was completely full, blocking my usual spot. Every window of the large house blazed with warm, inviting light, casting long shadows across the wet lawn. Despite the torrential downpour, it was obvious that a major event was taking place inside. I parked 2 blocks away, pulling up next to a storm drain. I turned off the ignition and sat in the dark for a moment, gathering my limited strength. Brenda was hosting the annual Church Women's Auxiliary fundraiser, an event she prepared for months in advance. She lived for these moments, the chance to play the gracious, wealthy matriarch in front of the congregation elite. The women inside were the neighborhood gatekeepers, quick to pray for you, but even quicker to judge your failures. I stepped out of the car, the freezing rain instantly soaking my shoulders and back. I reached into the trunk and pulled out the heavy black trash bag holding the few items I had salvaged from the penthouse. The plastic slipped against my wet fingers as I walked up the street. The sound of my sensible shoes sloshing through the puddles felt incredibly loud. I reached the paved walkway leading to the front door. The sounds of gospel music and joyful, loud chatter spilled through the heavy oak door, wrapping the house in an aura of perfect Christian fellowship. I walked up the steps, leaving a trail of muddy water on the pristine welcome mat. I hesitated for a fraction of a second before raising my fist and knocking heavily on the wood. The laughter inside paused briefly. The heavy door swung inward, revealing a burst of golden light and the overwhelming scent of expensive catering and floral arrangements. Brenda stood in the doorway. She was wearing a tailored emerald green dress, her hair perfectly pressed, and a string of large pearls resting against her collarbone. She wore a wide, welcoming smile, clearly expecting to greet a late-arriving donor or a senior pastor. But the moment her eyes adjusted to the dark porch and landed on my face, her expression shattered. The bright, hospitable smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated disgust. Her eyes darted from my soaked, unstyled hair, down to my damp clothes, and finally rested on the dripping garbage bag by my feet. "Valerie?" she hissed, the warmth completely gone from her voice, replaced by a tight, panicked whisper. She quickly stepped out onto the covered porch and pulled the heavy door mostly shut behind her, trapping the music and warmth inside and leaving us in the cold, damp air. "What in the world are you doing here, looking like a stray dog creeping up on my porch on the most important night of the year?" I kept my voice steady, refusing to let my shivering betray my exhaustion. "Hello, Brenda," I said simply. "Julian and I are getting a divorce. He filed the papers tonight and locked me out of the penthouse and all of our joint bank accounts. My company is going through a complex financial transition right now, and I have absolutely no access to my funds. I just need to use the guest room for one night until I can sort out my affairs in the morning." Brenda crossed her arms over her chest, taking a step back as if my sudden misfortune was a contagious disease. She shook her head, her perfectly painted lips thinning into a hard line of absolute rejection. "Are you out of your mind? Valerie," she demanded, keeping her voice low so the church ladies inside would not hear the scandal unfolding on the porch. "You want to drag your bankrupt divorced mess into my home, tonight of all nights. Do you know who is sitting in that living room right now? The entire auxiliary board is in there. My reputation in this community is immaculate, and I will not have you parading your failures in front of my guests." I stared at the woman who had promised my father she would always look out for me. She was using religion and social status as a shield to hide her total lack of basic human decency. "Brenda, I am not asking to join your party," I stated plainly. "I can walk around the back and go straight up the secondary stairs to the guest room. No one even needs to know I am here. It is freezing outside and I have nowhere else to go." Brenda scoffed a harsh, dismissive sound that cut deeper than the freezing wind. "Absolutely not," she said firmly. "You have always been too proud. Valerie always thought you were better than us with your tech company and your wealthy husband. Now look at you begging for charity at my door. Terrence is inside right now, entertaining potential investors for his new business venture. He is making real connections tonight. He cannot afford the sheer embarrassment of his bankrupt sister showing up like a vagrant, asking for a handout. It would completely ruin his image, and I will not let you drag my son down with your sinking ship." The mention of my stepbrother Terrence, the undisputed golden boy of the house, sent a fresh wave of cold anger through my veins. Terrence had squandered every opportunity handed to him, floating from one failed crypto startup to another, yet in Brenda's eyes, he was a budding billionaire. While I, the woman who had secretly paid the mortgage on this very house for 3 years to keep it out of foreclosure, was treated like a diseased beggar. I looked into Brenda's cold, calculating eyes, realizing that family loyalty meant absolutely nothing to her. Unless it came with a pristine reputation and a heavy bank account, she was willing to leave me on the street in a storm just to protect her fragile social standing, with people who cared nothing about her true character. I stood my ground on the wet concrete, not letting the shivering take over my posture. "Brenda," I said quietly, letting the weight of my words sink into the damp air. "You are turning away, your late husband's daughter, to impress a room full of strangers who only care about the appetizers you serve them. You talk about Christian charity every Sunday, but you cannot even offer a bed to family when they have lost everything. The hypocrisy is astounding." Brenda's eyes flashed with raw fury. She took a step closer, pointing a manicured finger directly at my chest. "Do not you dare lecture me about hypocrisy, Valerie," she spat. "You chose your path. You chose to prioritize your precious business over your husband. And now you are paying the price. The Lord teaches us that pride goes before a fall, and your pride has finally caught up with you. You brought this bankruptcy and this divorce upon yourself, and I refuse to let your toxic, negative energy infect the blessings that are finally coming to my son." She placed her hand firmly on the brass handle of the heavy door, preparing to retreat back into her warm, glowing fortress of fake righteousness. "You need to leave, Valerie," she ordered, her voice entirely devoid of sympathy. "Take your trash bag and walk back to whatever cheap car you drove here in. Maybe this night will finally teach you some humility. Now excuse me, I have important guests to attend to. The kind of people who actually know how to sustain their wealth." I watched her turn the handle, the golden light from the foyer briefly illuminating the cruel satisfaction on her face. She was enjoying this. She was relishing the opportunity to finally look down on the stepdaughter she had always secretly resented. The door began to close, but before it could click shut, the gap widened again. Another figure stepped out onto the porch, the heavy scent of expensive floral perfume cutting through the smell of the rain. It was a stark reminder that this night of humiliations was far from over. The figure standing in the doorway was Ashley Terrence's wife, holding a crystal wineglass and wearing a condescending smirk. But before she could speak, Brenda panicked at the thought of a scene and physically pushed her daughter-in-law back into the warm foyer. Brenda stepped completely out onto the freezing porch, pulling the heavy oak door shut behind her, with a definitive click, cutting off the gospel music completely. We were alone in the dark, the rain drumming a relentless beat against the roof of the porch. Brenda turned to me, her eyes wide with frantic, manic energy. She grabbed my arm, her perfectly manicured fingernails digging painfully into my wet skin, and pulled me toward the edge of the shadows. "Valerie, you are going to ruin everything!" she hissed, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and sheer terror. "Do you have any idea how hard I have worked to secure this house, to make it a beacon of the Lord's grace in this community? The women inside that living room are the wives of deacons and city councilmen. They look up to our family as a shining example of Christian prosperity. And now you show up here dragging the stench of failure and divorce up my driveway." I looked down at her hand gripping my arm, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold detachment. "Let go of me, Brenda," I said, my voice perfectly level. She released me as if I had burned her, taking a step back, but her verbal assault did not stop. It only escalated. She began to pace back and forth in the small dry space of the porch, her emerald dress swishing around her legs. "This is exactly what happens when a woman steps out of her God-given role," she preached, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "You wanted to be the boss. You wanted to build a financial empire instead of building a home. You emasculated Julian. You stripped him of his position as the head of the household, and the Lord does not bless a home built on pride. Your bankruptcy is not just bad luck, Valerie. It is divine retribution. You are reaping exactly what you sowed." The audacity of her words hung in the damp air. Brenda was a woman who had manipulated my father into leaving her this house. A woman who turned a blind eye every time her precious son Terrence scammed innocent people out of their savings. Yet here she was, weaponizing her religion to justify leaving her stepdaughter in the freezing rain. "You talk about divine retribution." "Brenda," I said quietly, watching the rain drip from the edge of the roof. "But what about the 3 years I paid the mortgage on this sanctuary of yours? When your husband died and left you drowning in debt? Was my money sinful then, when it kept you from being thrown out on the street? Did the church ladies know that my tech company, the one you claim is cursed, paid for the very roof over their heads tonight?" Brenda's face contorted with panic. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to an aggressive whisper. "That was a long time ago. But things are different now. Terrence is the man of this house. He is inside right now, hosting a networking event for his new digital currency project. He has actual millionaires in the den who are ready to back his vision. God is finally blessing him with the abundance he deserves. He is going to be the savior of this family." I could barely contain the bitter laugh that rose in my throat. Terrence was hosting a networking event to pitch another Ponzi scheme to gullible investors, and Brenda was calling it a blessing. She was so blinded by her obsession with having a successful male heir that she was willing to sacrifice me completely to protect his fragile ego. "He is pitching an illusion." "Brenda," I told her plainly, "the market is crashing, and Terrence does not have the technical infrastructure to support a digital currency platform. He is going to lose whatever money those people give him, and he is going to drag you down with him." "How dare you?" she gasped, pressing a hand to her chest in mock horror. "You are just jealous. You are sitting there stripped of your wealth and your husband, and you cannot stand the thought that your brother is about to surpass you. You come here in the middle of the night smelling like a wet dog, hoping to infect his blessed event with your misery. I will not allow your financial ruin to cast a dark cloud over his success. The sad truth was that she needed me to be a failure. She needed my supposed bankruptcy to be real, so she could finally validate her own twisted worldview. She needed me to fall so her golden boy could artificially rise. Valerie, she continued, her tone shifting to a patronizing fake sympathy. I am telling you this out of love. You need to find a cheap motel and get on your knees and pray for forgiveness. You need to ask the Lord to cleanse you of your worldly ambition and your stubborn pride. Maybe if you humble yourself, He will restore a fraction of what you lost. But you cannot stay here. The energy you bring is toxic, and my son needs absolute peace tonight. I stared at her, letting the silence stretch between us. She was terrified that my wet clothes and my trash bag of belongings would shatter the fragile glass house she had built on a foundation of my money and her lies. I am not asking for your money, Brenda, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. I just asked for the guest room bed, the same room I paid the taxes on for 3 years. You are telling me that your Christian charity cannot stretch far enough to give me a blanket and a closed door. It is not about a blanket. She snapped, her patience completely gone. It is about the shame you have brought upon us. I have spent years defending you to the congregation, telling them you were just focused on your career and that you would eventually settle down. But now Julian has cast you out, and your business is a public failure. What am I supposed to tell them, Valerie, that my stepdaughter is a bankrupt divorcee, begging at my door? No, I will not bear your shame. She stepped back toward the heavy oak door, her hand reaching for the brass handle. My decision is final, she stated, her eyes hard and unyielding. You will not step foot in this house tonight. Take your garbage bag and walk back to your car. Call a shelter. Call a friend. But do not ever come to my door looking like a beggar again. She opened the door, the warm light and the sound of gospel music spilling out onto the porch once more. But before she could slip back inside, the gap widened, and the figure who had tried to emerge earlier finally pushed her way past. Brenda Ashley. My white sister-in-law stood there holding her wine glass, her eyes scanning me from head to toe with a look of pure, unadulterated amusement. The final act of this humiliating porch performance was about to begin. Ashley stepped fully onto the concrete, her expensive beige cashmere sweater contrasting sharply with the bleak, stormy night behind me. She took a slow, deliberate sip from her crystal wine glass, the red liquid catching the dim porch light. Her blonde hair was perfectly curled, cascading over her shoulders in a way that screamed effortless wealth. A wealth that was ironically funded by the very company I had just put into strategic bankruptcy. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my soaked jeans and the heavy plastic trash bag resting by my feet. Well, Valerie Ashley began, her voice dripping with that sickeningly sweet southern charm she used as a weapon. This is certainly a tragic look for you. I must say, I am surprised to see the great tech CEO standing on our porch begging for a room. Didn't you always tell Terrence that your career was the most important thing in your life? I stood silently, letting the freezing rain hit my back, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Ashley stepped closer, the scent of her floral perfume mixing with the smell of wet asphalt. You know, Valerie? She continued, tilting her head in a mockery of sympathy. I always tried to warn you about this. You ladies always push so hard to be the strong, independent black woman. You grind and you hustle, and you try to act like you don't need anyone, especially a man. You completely emasculated Julian with your constant working and your obsession with your little startup, and now look at the result he left you, and you have absolutely nothing. She took another leisurely sip of her wine, savoring the moment while I shivered in the cold. You see, Valerie, there is a reason I stay home and support Terrence. A real woman knows how to be submissive, how to uplift her husband instead of competing with him. Terrence is inside right now, building a massive digital currency empire. He has actual millionaires, drinking his scotch and listening to his vision. Because I created a peaceful, supportive environment for him to thrive. I don't try to be the boss. I let him lead. Maybe if you had spent less time in boardrooms, trying to prove you were smarter than everyone else, and more time making a home for Julian. He wouldn't have locked you out tonight. The sheer audacity of her words made my blood run cold, colder than the rain soaking through my shirt. Ashley, a woman whose entire lifestyle was currently subsidized by my past financial contributions to this house, was lecturing me on domestic submission. She was praising Terrence, a man who had declared bankruptcy 3 times and was currently running a fraudulent crypto scheme out of a den that I technically owned. She was reveling in my perceived downfall, weaponizing the racist and sexist tropes society loved to throw at ambitious women of color to justify her own lack of substance. "Ashley," I said, my voice steady, despite the trembling in my jaw, "you don't know the first thing about my marriage or my company. Your husband is pitching a Ponzi scheme to those people inside, and the only reason you have that cashmere sweater on your back is because I paid the property taxes on this house when Brenda was ready to default. Do not lecture me on how to be a woman." Ashley's fake smile vanished, replaced by a hard, ugly scowl. She opened her mouth to snap back, but the heavy oak door was suddenly pulled wider. A man stepped out onto the porch, adjusting the lapels of an overly expensive tailored suit that I knew for a fact was bought on a high-interest credit card. It was Terrence the Golden Boy, the aspiring tech bro, the man whose entire existence was a monument to Brenda's delusional favoritism. He looked annoyed, his eyes darting frantically past me to the dark street, as if expecting an army of my creditors to be marching up the driveway. "What is going on out here?" Terrence demanded, his voice sharp and panicked. "Brenda told me you were causing a scene, Valerie. What are you doing here? Looking like you just crawled out of a storm drain?" "I have major investors in the den. They are about to write checks for 6 figures. I cannot have them looking out the window and seeing my bankrupt sister throwing a tantrum on the front porch. It completely ruins the aesthetic of my brand." "Your brand?" I repeated, feeling a dark laugh bubbling in my chest. "Terrence, I was thrown out of my home tonight. My accounts are temporarily frozen, and I simply asked your mother for the guest room, the same guest room I saved from foreclosure. You are telling me your fake crypto brand is more important than giving your sister a blanket for the night?" Terrence scoffed, running a hand over his perfectly lined-up haircut. "You are always so dramatic. Val, always trying to play the martyr. Julian texted me an hour ago. He told me you ran your company into the ground, filed for Chapter 11, and threw a massive fit when he asked for a divorce. You brought this on yourself, Valerie. You tried to play in the big leagues and you failed. You expect me to risk my reputation to shelter you when you couldn't even manage your own finances." He reached into his expensive suit pocket and pulled out a sleek leather wallet. He fumbled with it for a moment, his face twisted in a mixture of pity and extreme annoyance. He pulled out a single crumpled $50 bill and shoved it aggressively toward my chest. "Take this," he ordered, his tone matching the condescension his wife had just delivered. "Call an Uber and go find a cheap motel in the slums on the south side, or go sleep in that piece of junk car you drove here in. I do not care. Just get off my property before my guests see you. You are bad for business, Valerie, and you are embarrassing this family." Ashley giggled, stepping behind her husband and wrapping her arms around his waist, resting her chin on his shoulder like the perfect submissive wife she claimed to be. She looked at the $50 bill in Terrence's hand and then at the trash bag. "At my feet. Try to stretch that $50, Valerie," Ashley mocked. "Maybe you can buy a new business suit at the thrift store." I looked at the crumpled green bill hovering in the space between us. Terrence was trying to buy his own peace of mind, trying to pay me to disappear into the rain so he could continue living his delusion inside a house that my money had secured. He was the epitome of a false king ruling over a kingdom of lies. They all were. I didn't raise my hand. I didn't take the money. I just stared directly into Terrence's eyes, letting the absolute silence of the freezing porch speak for me. The final thread of family obligations snapped cleanly in two, setting the stage for what would happen next. Terrence did not wait for my answer. He simply thrust the crumpled $50 bill into the damp fabric of my coat pocket. His face a mask of irritated superiority, he grabbed Ashley's arm and pulled her back into the bright warmth of the foyer, giving me one last look of absolute disdain before reaching for the heavy oak door. The loud, definitive slam echoed through the freezing rain, followed instantly by the sharp metallic click of the deadbolt sliding into place. The gospel music and the laughter of the church ladies were instantly muffled, leaving me entirely alone in the dark. Standing on the porch of a house my money had saved from foreclosure, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the $50 bill. The paper felt pathetic and flimsy against my cold fingers, a cheap offering meant to buy away his guilt and purchase my silence. I stared at the portrait of U.S. Grant illuminated faintly by the amber glow of the porch light, and I felt a profound shift deep within my chest, the crushing weight of family obligation, the desperate desire to be accepted, the exhausting performance of the strong black woman holding everyone together. It all simply evaporated into the stormy night air. An icy calm settled over my mind, wiping away the hurt and replacing it with a crystalline, absolute clarity. A cold, calculating smile touched the corners of my lips. I did not fold the money. I did not pocket it. For later, I walked to the edge of the porch and let the bill flutter from my fingers, watching it land directly in a deep, muddy puddle forming near the storm drain. The dirty rainwater immediately soaked the paper, ruining the fake pity Terrence had handed me. I turned my back on the grand house and walked down the slick driveway, picking up my trash bag of belongings. The rain was coming down harder now, plastering my hair to my face and soaking my clothes all the way to my skin, but I barely felt the cold. I reached my old Honda Civic and slid into the driver's seat, tossing the plastic bag onto the passenger side. My hands were shaking, but not from sorrow. My fingers moved across my phone screen with deliberate purpose, scrolling past the ignored numbers of my ex-husband and my stepmother, until I reached the one contact I knew would answer. The phone rang only twice before a deep, gravelly voice came through the speaker. Valerie. It's past midnight. What is wrong? Malik's voice was thick with sleep, but the protective edge was instantly present, cutting through the exhaustion of his long work shifts. Malik, I need you, I said, my voice remarkably steady, despite the storm raging outside my car windows. Julian locked me out of the penthouse, and Brenda just slammed the door in my face. I have nowhere to go. There was no hesitation, no sigh of inconvenience, no questions about what I had done to provoke them. Just the sound of keys jangling and a heavy jacket being zipped up. Send me your location, Val. I am on my way. Keep the doors locked. I sent the pin drop and sat in the dark, listening to the rain hammer against the roof of my car. 20 minutes later, a pair of bright halogen headlights cut through the gloom of the suburban street. A battered white Ford work truck roared up to the curb, its engine loud and unrefined, completely out of place. In this neighborhood of silent luxury SUVs, the truck jerked into park and Malik threw the driver's side door open, stepping out into the downpour without even pulling up his hood. He was wearing his oil-stained canvas work jacket and heavy HVAC boots, his face etched with a fierce, protective fury. He did not say a word. He just marched up to my car, opened my door and wrapped his massive arms around me, pulling me out of the freezing driver's seat and into a tight, desperate embrace. He smelled of engine grease, Freon, and hard, honest labor. It was the most comforting scent in the world. It was the smell of real family, of unconditional loyalty that did not demand a perfect resume or a pristine social standing to validate its existence. He grabbed my trash bag from the passenger seat, threw it into the back of his truck, and ushered me into the warm cab. The heater was blasting dry, comforting air across my frozen skin. Malik slammed his door shut and slammed his hands against the steering wheel, letting out a string of curses aimed directly at the people inside the brightly lit house, sitting just down the street. I am going to march up there and tear Terrence out of that fake custom suit, Malik growled, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle ticking. I swear to God. Valerie, I will rip that heavy oak door right off its hinges. No, Malik, I said, reaching over to place a calming hand on his arm. Let them have their networking event. Let them play their little games in their stolen kingdom. They are not worth your anger or your time. We are leaving. He looked at me, his anger softening into deep concern, as he took in my soaked clothes and pale face. "You paid for that house, Valerie," he said quietly, shifting the truck into gear and pulling away from the curb. "You kept a roof over their heads when they had nothing, and this is how they repay you. It makes me sick. Julian is a coward, and Brenda is a hypocrite. You are the smartest, most hardworking woman I know, and they treat you like dirt on their shoes." "They are blind, Malik," I replied, leaning my head against the cold window glass as the suburban mansions faded into the rearview mirror, and their blindness is going to cost them everything. We drove in silence for a while, the rumble of the old truck and the warmth of the heater lulling my physically exhausted body into a state of deep relaxation. Malik's apartment was located on the south side of Atlanta, a far cry from the glittering high-rises of Buckhead or the manicured lawns of Brenda's neighborhood. It was a cramped one-bedroom unit in a worn-down building, but as we walked through his front door, it felt like a palace. He immediately went to his linen closet, pulling out his thickest clean blankets, and handed me a worn-out but incredibly soft hoodie. "I am taking the couch tonight, Val," he commanded, pointing toward his small bedroom. "Do not even try to argue with me. You are sleeping in a real bed." I changed out of my wet clothes, putting on the oversized hoodie that smelled like laundry detergent and safety. When I walked back into the tiny living area, Malik had made a pot of tea and placed a steaming mug on the small dining table. He sat on the edge of his faded sofa, watching me with a mixture of sadness and fierce pride. "They really thought they broke you tonight, didn't they?" he asked, taking a sip from his own mug. "They thought they left me with nothing," I answered. Pulling my laptop out of the bottom of my discarded purse, I set the sleek silver machine on the table. Flipping open the lid, the screen glowed to life, casting a sharp blue light across my face. The contrast between the cold, calculating rejection of my stepfamily and the gritty, unconditional warmth of my brother gave me the final surge of energy I needed. "What are you doing?" Malik asked, leaning forward to look at the screen. "I am executing the final phase," I said, my fingers flying across the keyboard, opening the secure portal to my legal team's encrypted server. The bankruptcy was just a shield, Malik. A way to shed the toxic debt of my old partners before the real transaction took place tomorrow morning. The markets are going to open, and my company is going to be acquired for $150 million. Julian signed away his rights to my assets 3 hours ago, and Terrence tied his fraudulent business to a bank loan that is about to flag him to the FBI. I am not bankrupt, Malik. I am about to become one of the wealthiest Black women in the Southeast. I pulled up the final authorization email, the one that would release the corporate trust and finalize the monumental acquisition. The cursor hovered over the send button, a small blinking line that represented the culmination of 5 years of blood, sweat, and silent suffering. I looked up at my brother, his eyes wide with shock and dawning realization. I smiled a true, genuine smile and pressed the button. "Let them sleep well tonight," I whispered, "because tomorrow they are going to wake up in hell." Malik's battered Ford truck pulled up behind my Civic, its headlights cutting through the relentless Atlanta rain. He jumped out before the truck was even fully parked, his heavy work boots splashing in the deep puddles. He did not care about the downpour or the dark grease stains on his uniform. He just rushed over and wrapped his thick arms around me, pulling me into a fierce hug that smelled of ozone and hard physical labor. A smell that instantly reminded me of our late father. I finally let the tears fall, holding onto his jacket, not crying for the husband who had discarded me, or the stepfamily who had turned me away, but out of pure, exhausting relief that someone in this world actually loved me unconditionally. We left my car parked on the dark street, and I climbed into the passenger seat of his truck, the heater blasting warm, dry air against my freezing skin. Malik did not press for details right away. He just drove, navigating the slick, wet highways toward his small apartment on the south side of the city, giving me the silent space I desperately needed when we finally walked through his front door. The contrast between Julian's cold, sterile penthouse and Malik's cramped lived-in space was staggering. It was not much, just a modest one-bedroom unit with faded carpet and a handed-down sofa. But to me it was a fortress of genuine loyalty. He immediately went to the small kitchen, pulling out a clean towel and heating up a pot of water on the stove. "Sit down, Val," he said, his voice thick with a deep protective anger. "You are shaking. What did that pristine suit-wearing coward do to you?" I wrapped the warm towel around my shoulders and told him everything. The fake bankruptcy, the expedited divorce papers, the frozen bank accounts, and the ultimate cruel rejection at Brenda's house. Earlier that night, Malik clenched his jaw, his rough hands gripping the edge of the kitchen counter, tight enough to turn his knuckles pale. "They are all blind, Valerie," he said fiercely, stepping forward to hand me a steaming mug of tea. "You are the smartest person in any room. You sacrificed your own youth to make sure I got through trade school, to make sure Dad had a decent funeral. They looked down on us because we had to claw our way up from the dirt. But they have absolutely no idea what you are really made of." I took a slow sip of the tea, letting the warmth seep deep into my aching chest. I smiled up at him, my eyes catching the faint glow of my laptop screen, resting on his small dining table. "They are about to find out, Malik," I told him, my voice steadying into a cold resolve. "You might want to call out of work tomorrow, because our lives are going to change the second the sun comes up." The glow from the laptop screen bathed the tiny kitchen in a pale blue light, reflecting off Malik's wide eyes as he leaned over my shoulder. I turned the screen slightly so he could read the dense legal documents filling the display. What Julian and Brenda and all the rest of them thought was a catastrophic failure was actually a surgical financial strike. Months ago, my legal team and I had quietly transferred all the toxic debt and unfavorable equity agreements from the early days of my startup into a subsidiary shell entity. It was a completely separate corporate vessel designed specifically to hold the dead weight of terrible investors who had tried to take advantage of a young black female founder. When the time was right, we filed Chapter 11, bankruptcy exclusively for that shell company, intentionally letting the public records show a massive default. Julian had seen the preliminary filings, panicked, and assumed my entire fintech empire was collapsing. He was a public relations director, but he possessed absolutely zero financial literacy. He never bothered to look at the holding structure or read the fine print. If he had, he would have realized the core technology. The proprietary payment gateway that processed millions in daily transactions for minority-owned businesses was safely walled off in an untouchable trust. The bankruptcy of the shell entity was a mandatory condition set by the global payment giant that wanted to buy my company. They demanded a clean slate before they handed over $150 million in pure cash. I spent the last 3 weeks enduring Julian's insults and complaints, playing the part of the stressed failing wife just to keep him from asking too many questions. I needed him to want out. I needed him to run away so fast that he would gladly sign an expedited divorce decree, waiving all rights to my future assets to save his own skin. And tonight, he had done exactly that. He had handed me the keys to my absolute freedom. I opened my secure email portal. The message was addressed to my lead corporate attorney, a ruthless negotiator who was waiting in a high-rise office in New York for my final signal. The subject line was blank. I rested my fingers on the keyboard, the quiet clacking of the keys filling the cramped apartment as I typed the final directive release. The trust execute, the acquisition agreement. I stared at the words for a long moment. The rain continued to beat against the single window of Malik's apartment, the sound washing away the last remnants of the woman I used to be. The woman who tried to buy her stepmother's love, who tried to shrink herself so her husband could feel big. She was gone, leaving behind a cold, calculating architect of her own destiny. I pressed the trackpad, feeling the soft click under my finger. The email vanished from the screen, rocketing through the digital ether to set the financial world on fire. Malik let out a low whistle, shaking his head as he leaned back against the counter. "You played them, Valerie. You played them all perfectly. They thought they were throwing you out with the trash, but you were just letting them take themselves out to the curb." I closed the laptop, the sudden darkness in the room feeling heavy and peaceful. I did not cry a single tear. There was no grief left in my body, for people who only loved me when my bank accounts were accessible. We spent the next few hours sitting in the dim light, talking quietly about the future. Malik talked about wanting to start his own HVAC commercial fleet, and I promised him that by tomorrow afternoon he would have the seed money to buy 10 trucks in cash. He laughed, a deep booming sound that warmed the cold apartment, brushing away the lingering chill of the storm outside. The dead of night is usually when the pain hits the hardest, when the distractions of the day fade away, and you are forced to sit with your thoughts. But tonight, the dark was my ally. It was the quiet space between the end of my suffering and the beginning of my retribution. I thought about Ashley standing on that porch, wearing the cashmere sweater my money had essentially paid for, mocking my ambition. I thought about Brenda using her religion to justify her cruelty, leaving me in the rain to protect her fragile social standing. And I thought about Sylvia kicking me out of a penthouse I had funded entirely because my working-class background offended her sensibilities. They had all shown their true colors, the second they believed I had nothing left to offer them financially. As the hours crept toward dawn, the exhaustion finally began to catch up with me. My bones ached from the stress of the day, and the dampness of my clothes had settled deep into my muscles. Malik gently ordered me to go sleep in his bed, refusing to take no for an answer. I laid down on the slightly lumpy mattress, pulling his heavy quilt up to my chin. The room smelled faintly of laundry detergent and motor oil, a grounding, honest scent. The silence of the early morning felt pregnant with anticipation. Somewhere in the city, Julian was likely sleeping soundly. Assuming he was finally free of his bankrupt wife somewhere in the suburbs, Brenda and Terrence were likely dreaming of the fake millionaires they thought would save their fraudulent business. They were all resting peacefully in their delusions, completely unaware that a corporate tidal wave was currently rushing toward their fragile glass houses. I closed my eyes, letting the rhythm of my breathing slow down. I had survived their cruelty. I had survived their microaggressions, their fake religious guilt trips, their desperate grasping greed. I had survived being the scapegoat, the bankroll, the punching bag, and tomorrow I would no longer be just surviving. I would be reigning. I let the darkness pull me under, knowing that when I opened my eyes again, the world as they knew it would be permanently dismantled, and they would have absolutely no one to blame but themselves. The fateful click of that trackpad had sealed their fate, and tomorrow the sun would rise on an empire that belonged solely to me. The morning sun filtered through the thin blinds of Malik's South Atlanta apartment, casting pale yellow stripes across the worn carpet. I woke up feeling an unfamiliar sensation settling deep in my chest. An absolute untroubled peace. The heavy, crushing weight of playing the failing wife, the struggling entrepreneur, the unwanted stepdaughter was completely gone. I threw off the heavy quilt and swung my legs over the edge of the mattress, the cold floorboards grounding me. In reality, I walked out into the small living area, pulling the oversized hoodie tighter around my shoulders. Malik was already awake, standing by the narrow kitchen counter with two mismatched mugs of black coffee, sending steam into the chilly air. He handed me one without a word, his eyes fixed on the digital clock resting on top of his microwave. The red numbers glowed brightly, reading 7:58 a.m. We stood side by side in the quiet apartment, the silence stretching tight, like a pulled string, waiting for the inevitable snap. 7:59 a.m. I took a slow sip of the bitter coffee, letting the caffeine sharpen my senses. My phone rested on the chipped laminate table, its black screen reflecting the dim kitchen light. The acquisition was scheduled to go public. The very second the New York Stock Exchange opened, my legal team had coordinated the press releases with surgical precision, ensuring the narrative was entirely in our control. Julian and Brenda and all their arrogant friends had spent their lives worshipping status and wealth, believing their suburban homes and middle management titles made them superior. They measured human worth in credit limits and country club invitations, And in exactly 60 seconds, the very institutions they worshipped were going to broadcast my supreme victory to the entire world. 8 o'clock. The red digits shifted. My phone vibrated against the table. A short, sharp buzz. Then a second later, another buzz. Then the device erupted into a continuous violent hum, dancing across the tabletop like it was possessed. The screen lit up with a barrage of push notifications, tumbling over each other in a chaotic waterfall of breaking news alerts. The Wall Street Journal was the first to strike, pushing a headline that demanded immediate attention: historic Atlanta fintech unicorn acquired in landmark nine-figure deal. Forbes followed mere seconds later with a more personal angle, silencing the critics. Female founder Valerie orchestrates brilliant restructuring, securing $150 million cash buyout from global payment giant. Bloomberg and TechCrunch stacked up relentlessly, flooding the lock screen with variations of the exact same truth. My supposed bankruptcy was a masterclass in corporate strategy, and I was walking away with a mountain of liquid cash. Malik slammed his coffee mug down on the counter, oblivious to the dark liquid sloshing over the brim. He grabbed my phone, his large hands dwarfing the device as his eyes rapidly scanned the bold headlines. A massive grin broke across his face, revealing all his teeth, and he let out a loud, booming laugh that shook the small kitchen. He grabbed me by the shoulders, spinning me around the cramped room, his boots stomping against the floorboards. "You did it, Valerie," he yelled, his voice thick with overwhelming pride. "You actually did it. $150 million in pure cash. They cannot ever touch you again. They cannot ever look down on you again. You own the whole board now." I laughed with him, a sound of pure, unadulterated triumph. The heavy knot of anxiety that had lived in my stomach for 5 years, finally unraveling. The money was staggering beyond anything I had ever allowed myself to imagine when I started writing code in my childhood bedroom. But the money was only half of the victory. The real triumph was the preservation of my core technology. The payment gateway I had built specifically to empower minority-owned small businesses was not just surviving. It was being integrated into a massive global infrastructure. My legacy was secure. My life's work was validated, and I had retained a coveted seat on the executive board of the acquiring corporation. I had total financial independence and immense corporate power. The phone continued its relentless vibrations, skittering closer to the edge of the table. The news alerts were quickly being replaced by incoming communications. The private group chat with my board of directors was exploding with champagne emojis and congratulatory messages. My lead counsel sent a simple text reading, "The wire transfers have officially cleared. The corporate trust is dissolved. The funds are sitting safely in your private offshore accounts. Enjoy your morning." The reality of those words settled over me. I was no longer a woman, begging for a guest room, or silently enduring microaggressions on a freezing porch. I was a centimillionaire operating entirely outside of their miserable little hierarchy. Then the calls began to pour in. The first few were from angel investors who had backed me early on, eager to celebrate their massive returns. Then came the calls from industry peers who had finally connected the dots regarding my clever Chapter 11 maneuver. I let them all go to voicemail, watching the missed call. Notifications stack higher and higher, my complete attention focused on the inevitable shift in the caller ID. Names. It took exactly 12 minutes for the news to breach the superficial social circles of my enemies. The screen flashed, displaying a highly recognizable local number. Julian. My legally detached ex-husband was calling the man who had gleefully thrown my belongings into the hallway, who had locked my accounts just 12 hours ago to protect his precious assets, was now desperately trying to reach the woman he thought was ruined. The phone rang, its persistent tone echoing the frantic panic I knew was currently suffocating him. He called once, then twice, then a third time. Immediately, leaving frantic, disjointed voicemails. The notification icon showed his messages piling up a desperate digital trail of a man realizing he had just handed away half of a massive fortune for absolutely nothing. Malik looked at the screen, watching Julian's name flash again and again. He crossed his arms, leaning back against the counter with a look of deep satisfaction on his face. "Should we pick it up?" he asked, a dangerous, amused glint in his eye. "Maybe politely ask if he needs to borrow $50 to catch an Uber." I smiled, reaching out to silence the ringer, picking up the phone to watch the screen light up with a new incoming call. This time, the caller ID displayed Brenda's home number. She must have been sitting in her pristine kitchen sipping her morning tea. When one of her church ladies forwarded her the Forbes article, her frantic dialing was the digital equivalent of her dropping to her knees. The golden boy Terence and the condescending Ashley were undoubtedly standing right beside her, staring in sheer horror at the realization that the stepdaughter they had left in the storm was now wealthier than everyone they had ever tried to impress. Combined, "Let them panic, Malik," I said softly, setting the silenced phone back down on the table. "Let them sit in the mess they made. We have an empire to build, and I have a few phone calls of my own to make to ensure they face the absolute maximum consequences of their choices." Today is going to be a very busy day. Miles away in Midtown Atlanta, Julian was walking into his pristine glass-walled public relations firm, completely oblivious to the digital tidal wave that had just hit the financial sector. I would later learn every pathetic detail of his morning, from former acquaintances who were all too eager to describe his spectacular public humiliation. Julian arrived at the office just after 8 o'clock, holding an overpriced artisanal espresso and wearing a custom-tailored suit that he had undoubtedly purchased using the credit line tied to my old corporate accounts. He strutted into the sleek, minimalist break room where several junior executives and account managers were gathering for their morning coffee. He could not wait to spin his own narrative to control the public relations of his personal life before anyone else could. Julian leaned against the marble counter, swirling his espresso and loudly complaining to anyone who would listen about the terrible night he had just endured. He painted himself as the pragmatic victim, the successful executive who had finally cut loose a dead weight wife who was dragging down his immaculate brand. He boasted about how I had come crying to the penthouse, a bankrupt failure whose company was drowning in Chapter 11 debt. He actually laughed as he described throwing my clothes into a black trash bag and forcing me to sign an expedited divorce decree right there in the hallway. "I dodged a massive bullet," he told his captivated audience, taking a smug sip of his coffee. "You have to know when to cut your losses in this business." And in life, she tried to hide her absolute financial ruin from me, but I caught it just in time. My lawyers drafted an ironclad waiver preventing her from ever touching my assets or bringing her toxic debt into my portfolio. I locked her out of every joint account and sent her packing back to the slums where she belongs. His colleagues nodded sympathetically, praising his decisive action and validating his cruel ego. Julian was practically glowing, wrapped in his own delusion of superiority. But his moment of triumph was violently interrupted. The heavy glass door of the break room swung open, and the senior managing partner of the firm, a ruthless man named Mr. Thornton, stood in the doorway. His face was an absolute mask of fury, clutching a sleek tablet in his hand, his knuckles stark white from the pressure. "Julian, in my office right now," Mr. Thornton barked, his voice echoing off the glass walls, leaving no room for negotiation. Julian set his espresso down, his smug smile faltering slightly, but he quickly smoothed his expression, assuming he was being called in to discuss a promotion or a new high-profile client. He followed the managing partner down the long, bright corridor, stepping into the massive corner office that overlooked the Atlanta skyline. The second the heavy oak door clicked shut, Mr. Thornton slammed the tablet face up onto the center of his expansive mahogany desk, the loud smack causing Julian to physically jump. "Explain this," Mr. Thornton demanded, pointing a shaking finger at the bright glowing screen. Julian leaned forward, his brow furrowing in confusion as his eyes landed on the front page of the Wall Street Journal app. The bold black headline screamed the truth. Historic Atlanta fintech unicorn acquired in landmark nine-figure deal. Female founder Valerie orchestrates brilliant restructuring, securing $150 million cash buyout from global payment giant. Below the headline was a high-resolution photograph of me standing confident and poised in front of my company logo. All the blood instantly drained from Julian's face, his perfectly tanned skin turning an ashen, sickly gray. His eyes darted back and forth across the screen, reading the words, $150 million over and over again. His brain violently short-circuiting as it tried to process the impossible information. He stumbled backward, his knees hitting the edge of a leather guest chair, and he collapsed into it, gasping for air, as if the oxygen had been suddenly sucked out of the room. "This is a mistake," Julian stammered, his hands trembling violently as he reached out toward the tablet. "A typo. She filed for bankruptcy yesterday. I saw the Chapter 11 documents myself. My lawyers confirmed it. She is totally broke. She executed a strategic debt restructuring of a useless subsidiary shell," Mr. Thornton yelled, slamming his hands on the desk and leaning over Julian. "She cleanly wiped out her bad equity and sold the core proprietary technology to the largest global payment processor on the planet." "She is not bankrupt, Julian. She is one of the wealthiest tech founders in the Southeast, and the corporation that just wired her $150 million in pure cash happens to be the single biggest public relations client this entire firm represents." Julian's breath hitched, a cold, suffocating panic wrapping around his throat. The reality of what he had done, the sheer catastrophic magnitude of his own stupidity, came crashing down on him with the force of a freight train. The expedited divorce decree he had gleefully forced me to sign in the hallway. The legal document his own lawyers had drafted to ensure a clean, immediate break with zero division of future assets. He had demanded that I waive all rights to his money, and by signing that exact same paper, he had permanently, irrevocably waived all of his rights to mine. In his desperate, arrogant rush to protect his paltry savings and a few leased luxury cars from a bankrupt wife, he had legally walled himself off from a $75 million marital payout. He had locked me out of a joint checking account that held maybe $40,000, and in exchange, he had voluntarily handed me full, undivided ownership of a $150 million empire. The math was simple, and it was completely devastating. He had played himself. "I did not know," Julian whispered, staring blankly at the wall, his voice cracking under the weight of his monumental failure. "I made her sign a waiver. I pushed her out. I told her to take her trash bag and leave. I literally handed her everything." Mr. Thornton glared down at him with absolute disgust. "You are a public relations director, Julian. Your entire job is to gather the facts, manage optics, and read the fine print before making a move. You just threw away the greatest financial windfall of your pathetic life because you were too arrogant to look past a superficial headline. You are a laughingstock, and worse, you have brought an immense, unimaginable liability straight through the front doors of my firm." Julian's phone began to vibrate wildly in his pocket. The very same frantic calls I had watched light up my screen in Malik's kitchen. He pulled it out with shaking fingers, staring at the notifications flooding in. Congratulations from mutual friends, links to the Forbes article sent by his stunned colleagues, and a highly panicked text message from his mother Sylvia, who had clearly just seen the morning news. He stared at his phone screen, watching my name trend across business platforms, while his own existence unraveled. He remembered the exact sound the brass key made when I tossed it onto the entryway table, a sound that now mocked him with deafening clarity. He had called me a dead weight, a sinking anchor, and mocked my working-class background while standing inside a penthouse that my money had secured. Now he was nothing but a cautionary tale of greed and absolute ignorance. His chest heaved as he tried to formulate a plan. A way to walk back the divorce, to claim he was emotionally distressed when he handed me the papers, but the ink was dry. The electronic filing had been processed exactly as his lawyers had expedited it. There was no loophole, no back door, no saving grace. He was trapped in the prison of his own creation, listening to his boss breathe heavily above him while the entire corporate world celebrated the woman he had treated like garbage. The bitter irony tasted like ash in his mouth, and he squeezed his eyes shut, wishing it was all a terrible nightmare. But the bright, glowing screen of the tablet on the desk remained utterly unchanged, a glowing testament to my victory and his ultimate unmitigated defeat. 20 miles north of Julian's spectacular corporate execution, Terrence and Ashley were sitting in the plush leather chairs of a premium commercial bank branch in Buckhead, completely unaware that their own execution was already in motion. Terrence was wearing the exact same overly expensive tailored suit he had worn the night before, eager to project the image of a successful tech bro, while Ashley sat beside him draped in cashmere, her designer handbag resting on her lap. They had arrived at the bank at exactly 8:30 a.m., expecting to finalize a massive line of credit for Terrence's new digital currency venture. He had pitched his project as a revolutionary platform, boasting about his integration with a premier payment processing API. He felt untouchable, sitting there in the climate-controlled office, waiting for the senior loan officer to walk in with the approval paperwork that would finally fund his illusion of grandeur. The heavy glass doors swung open, but the senior loan officer, Mr. Harrington, did not walk in with the warm, welcoming smile he usually reserved for high-net-worth clients. His face was rigid and pale, his eyes entirely devoid of the polite deference he had shown them yesterday. He walked around his massive oak desk, but he did not sit down. He remained standing, looking down at Terrence and Ashley with an expression of profound professional disgust. He dropped a thin manila folder onto the desk, the sound sharp and final in the quiet office. Terrence leaned forward, a confident smirk playing on his lips, ready to sign whatever documents were inside. But Mr. Harrington held up his hand, stopping Terrence before he could even reach for a pen. "We are not funding your venture, Terrence," Mr. Harrington stated, his voice ice-cold and clipping through the silence of the room. "In fact, as of 8:15 this morning, this financial institution is formally severing all ties with you and your business entities." Terrence's smirk vanished instantly, replaced by a deep flush of defensive anger. He began to sputter, demanding to know what the problem was, bragging about the strength of his platform and his seamless integration with a top-tier payment gateway. Ashley chimed in, her southern charm evaporating into shrill indignation, threatening to take their business to a competing bank. But Mr. Harrington simply shook his head, pulling a printed sheet of paper from the folder. "You do not have a platform anymore, Terrence," Mr. Harrington said flatly. "The payment gateway API you relied on to process your digital currency was just acquired in a landmark merger. 30 minutes ago, the acquiring corporation immediately ran an automated security sweep of all integrated accounts, and your venture triggered a catastrophic fraud risk alert. They flagged your entire operation as a highly volatile Ponzi scheme, operating without proper regulatory compliance. They immediately terminated your access to the gateway and forwarded the audit report to our risk management department, effectively blacklisting you from receiving a single dime of commercial credit from any reputable bank in this state. You are entirely shut down, and you are incredibly lucky. I am not calling federal authorities right now to report your attempts to secure a loan using fraudulent projections." Ashley's face drained of all color, her manicured hands trembling as she grabbed Terrence's arm, realizing the money, the lifestyle, the elite status she craved was completely gone. Terrence was hyperventilating, his mind racing, trying to figure out how his infallible tech connection had suddenly cut him off. He demanded to know who had bought the gateway, claiming it was a mistake, complaining that he personally knew the founder. Mr. Harrington looked at him with a mixture of pity and contempt. He reached into the folder one last time and slid a color printout of the morning financial news across the desk. Staring right back at Terrence was the confident, unbothered face of his stepsister, the woman he had shoved a $50 bill at the night before, standing under the headline declaring her a $150 million tech giant. While Terrence was suffocating in the sterile air of the bank, his mother Brenda was sitting in the opulent sunroom of Sister Davis, a prominent member of their church auxiliary. The morning light streamed through the large windows, illuminating the fine china and the silver tea service Brenda was holding court, wearing her favorite string of pearls still riding the high of her perceived victory from the night before. She was delicately sipping her Earl Grey tea while spinning a tragic tale to the other church ladies about how she had been forced to show tough love to her bankrupt, divorced stepdaughter Valerie. She painted herself as the righteous matriarch, protecting her blessed son Terence from Valerie's toxic negative energy. The other women nodded sympathetically, offering soft murmurs of prayer and validation, fueling Brenda's towering ego. But the sweet taste of her self-righteous victory was violently cut short. Sister Davis, who had been casually scrolling through her phone while listening, suddenly gasped so loudly that the entire sunroom fell silent. She stared at the screen, her eyes wide with absolute shock. Brenda's Sister Davis whispered, her voice shaking, "You said Valerie was bankrupt. You said her company was failing." Brenda smiled a tight, condescending smile. "Yes, it is a tragedy, but pride goes before a fall, as the good book says." Sister Davis slowly turned her phone around, pushing the glowing screen directly into Brenda's line of sight. "Brenda, her company did not fail. She just sold it for $150 million in cash. It is on the front page of every news outlet in the country." Brenda's vision blurred, the bold black letters of the headline swimming before her eyes. The image of Valerie looking powerful and wealthy, beyond imagination, burned itself into her retinas. The delicate porcelain teacup slipped from her suddenly numb fingers, crashing against the hardwood floor, shattering into dozens of sharp, jagged pieces. The hot tea splattered across her expensive shoes and the pristine rug, but she did not even feel it. The reality of what she had done crashed down on her with the weight of a collapsing building. She had locked a centimillionaire out in the freezing rain. She had insulted, demeaned, and discarded the single most powerful and wealthy person she would ever know in her entire pathetic life, just to protect a son who was currently pitching a fake business. Brenda's phone began to ring loudly, cutting through the stunned silence of the sunroom. It was Terence calling frantically from the bank parking lot. Brenda answered with a trembling hand, putting the phone to her ear without saying a word. Terence's voice poured through the speaker, hysterical and breathless. "Mom, we are ruined. Valerie is the one who shut down my API. She is the billionaire. She has the power to destroy my entire life. We have to fix this. We have to find her right now." Brenda felt the air escape her lungs. She knew exactly where Valerie was, the only place she could have gone. The tiny, cramped apartment on the south side belonging to Malik, the loyal brother who had always seen Valerie's true worth. Panic, pure, unadulterated terror seized Brenda's heart. They had to get to Malik's apartment. They had to grovel, beg, and crawl if necessary, to secure even a fraction of the wealth they had so arrogantly thrown away. The illusions of their superiority were completely shattered, leaving nothing but the desperate, frantic scramble of people realizing they had just ruined their own lives. Malik's cramped apartment on the south side of Atlanta was usually a quiet sanctuary, a place where the noise of the city faded into the background. But at precisely 10:15 that morning, the silence was shattered by a frantic, aggressive pounding on the thin wooden front door. The sound echoed through the small living room, making the cheap windows rattle in their frames. I was sitting at the tiny laminate dining table, sipping my third cup of coffee, completely unbothered by the noise. Malik, who had been watching the financial news coverage on his small television, stood up, his massive frame immediately shifting into a protective stance. He looked at me, his jaw clenched tight. "They actually came," Malik said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble, shaking his head in disbelief. "The absolute, unmitigated nerve of these people. I told you they would track my phone, Val. I should have turned the location off." I smiled, taking another slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, taking in the sweet aroma of absolute victory. "Leave it on, Malik," I said, my voice perfectly calm, soothing the tension in the room. "Let them come. Let them stand out there in the damp hallway and panic. They spent years making me feel like I had to perform for them. Now they can perform for me." The pounding intensified, followed by the muffled, frantic voice of my ex-husband, Julian. Valerie, please open the door, sweetheart. I know you are in there. We need to talk. This is a huge misunderstanding, baby. Please just open the door so I can explain. Sweetheart. Malik repeated the word, tasting like poison in his mouth. He grabbed a heavy wrench from his tool bag, resting by the door, just in case I'm going to open this door. Valerie, and if that polished parasite takes one step inside my apartment, I am putting him through the drywall. Let him speak. Malik, I instructed, setting my mug down with a soft clink. Let them all speak. It is important to hear exactly how low they are willing to crawl. Malik unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open, filling the frame with his imposing bulk blocking their entry. The hallway outside was a chaotic, pathetic tableau of desperation. Julian stood front and center, his expensive tailored suit looking slightly rumpled, his hair disheveled from his panicked drive across the city. He was clutching a massive, ostentatious bouquet of red roses, the kind you buy at an overpriced florist when you are trying to buy forgiveness for an unforgivable sin. Standing directly behind him, jostling for position, were Brenda, Terrence, and Ashley. They had clearly carpooled their faces, pale masks of sheer terror and greedy anticipation. Julian's eyes darted past Malik's, broad shoulders desperately searching the small apartment, until he locked eyes with me, sitting calmly at the table. Valerie, he gasped, pushing forward slightly, but Malik didn't budge an inch, blocking him with an immovable presence. Julian held the roses up like a shield, a pathetic offering meant to erase the cruelty of the night before. Valerie? My love, thank God I found you. I didn't stand up. I didn't invite him in. I just looked at him, letting the silence stretch, stretching the tension until it was nearly suffocating. Your love, Julian? I asked, my voice echoing off the bare walls of the apartment. That is a fascinating term for a man who locked me out of my own checking accounts 12 hours ago and threw a trash bag of my clothes onto the floor. Julian swallowed hard, a nervous sweat beading on his forehead, his public relations training kicking in as he frantically tried to spin the most disastrous narrative of his life. Baby, please, you have to understand the pressure I was under, he stammered, his voice pitching higher in his desperation. The firm was breathing down my neck about the bankruptcy rumors. I was terrified of the financial liability. I panicked, Valerie. I made a terrible mistake. But those divorce papers, that wasn't real. Not real? I repeated, tilting my head slightly, mimicking the exact condescending expression he had used on me the night before. The ink looked very real. Julian, the expedited filing clause your lawyers drafted looked very real. The lock on the penthouse door felt incredibly real. He stepped closer to Malik, the roses trembling in his hands, the scent of the flowers completely failing to mask the stench of his desperation. It was a test, Valerie, Julian blurted out, grasping at the most ridiculous, unhinged excuse his panicked mind could invent. A test. I wanted to see if our marriage was strong enough to survive the absolute worst-case scenario. I wanted to know if you would fight for us. I was trying to shock you into realizing how much we needed each other. I never intended for the divorce to go through. I was going to tear the papers up this morning. A harsh, guttural laugh erupted from Malik, the sound bouncing off the walls of the hallway. A test, Malik mocked, stepping forward and forcing Julian to stumble backward. You threw your wife out into a freezing rainstorm with absolutely nothing because you were testing her. You are not just a coward, Julian. You are a terrible liar. Julian ignored Malik, his pleading eyes fixed entirely on me. Valerie, please, he begged, ignoring the humiliation of his current position. We can fix this. We can call the lawyers right now and withdraw the filing. We are a team. We built that life together, the penthouse, the cars. We can go back to how it was before the restructuring. I love you, Valerie. I have always loved you. You loved the financial stability I provided, Julian. I corrected my voice, devoid of any emotion cutting through his pathetic lies. You loved the status of being married to a successful founder. You loved the penthouse that my money secured. But the second you thought the money was gone, you threw me away faster than a crumpled receipt. You didn't test our marriage, Julian. You revealed your true character, and your true character is entirely worthless. I watched the desperation in his eyes curdle into a raw, panicked fear. He knew the acquisition was real. He knew the $150 million was sitting safely in my private accounts, far beyond his legal reach. He had gambled everything on my supposed failure, and he had lost spectacularly. The roses drooped in his hands, the bright red petals looking absurdly cheerful against the grim reality of his total financial and marital devastation. But Julian's pathetic display of gaslighting was only the opening act behind him. My stepmother Brenda pushed her way forward, using her elbows to shove past her own son, Terence. She was wearing a different dress today, a conservative navy blue number, likely chosen to project an aura of humble piety. She clasped her hands tightly in front of her chest, her face pulled into a mask of deep maternal sorrow, putting on a performance worthy of an Oscar. "Valerie, sweet girl!" Brenda cried out, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion, ignoring the fact that she had literally slammed a heavy oak door in my face less than 12 hours ago. "Thank the Lord we found you safe. I have been up all night praying for you, pacing the floors, sick with worry about my late husband's precious daughter." The sheer hypocrisy of her words was breathtaking, Brenda. A woman who had weaponized her religion to cast me out was now using it as a shield to crawl back into my good graces. She looked at the cramped apartment, casting a fleeting, disparaging glance at the faded carpet before forcing her eyes back to me, projecting a sickeningly fake warmth. "We came to take you home," Valerie Brenda continued, taking a step toward the doorway only to be blocked by Malik's imposing frame. She offered him a tight, entirely fake smile. "Please, Malik, let your sister come home to her family. We have the guest room all prepared for her. She belongs with us where we can take care of her properly. We can protect her from all this sudden, overwhelming attention." "Home?" I asked, raising an eyebrow, letting the word hang in the tense air. "You mean the home where you told me my toxic negative energy was ruining your son's fake networking event? The home where you told me I was suffering divine retribution for being an ambitious woman? The home where you told me to take my trash bag and find a motel in the slums?" Brenda's face flushed a deep, uncomfortable red, but she pushed through the humiliation driven entirely by the blinding glare of my newly acquired fortune. "That was a terrible misunderstanding, Valerie," she pleaded, her voice dropping to a loud, dramatic whisper. "I was so stressed about Terrence's investors I wasn't thinking clearly. I was trying to protect him. But I realize now I was abandoning you. The Lord has convicted my heart, Valerie. He showed me the error of my ways. We are family, and family forgives." I stared at her, absorbing the absolute depth of her manipulation. She wasn't convicted by God. She was convicted by the front page of the Wall Street Journal. She had done the math. She had seen the 9-figure buyout, and she realized that the stepdaughter she had treated like dirt was now the undisputed financial savior she had always craved. She was willing to swallow her pride, willing to play the repentant mother, simply to gain access to the kingdom she had so foolishly locked herself out of. Ashley pushed her way past her mother-in-law, her designer cashmere replaced by a simple oversized sweater meant to make her look fragile and harmless. She let out a loud, dramatic sob, wiping at eyes that were completely dry of any real tears. "Valerie, please, you have to listen to me," Ashley whined, her voice trembling with practiced vulnerability. "Last night was a total misunderstanding. I was just so overwhelmed by the stress Terrence has been under. I drank too much wine and I said things I deeply regret. I did not mean any of those awful things about you being a strong black woman or emasculating Julian. I was just projecting my own insecurities because I admire your ambition so much. You are such an inspiration to women of color everywhere, and I was just jealous of your success. Please do not let my stupid drunken mistake ruin our family bond." Valerie let out a slow breath. Watching the performance unfold, Ashley was a master of white tears, weaponizing her perceived fragility the moment she was held accountable for her own venomous racism and sexism. The night before she had reveled in tearing down my success, treating my hardworking background as a character flaw. And now she was playing the victim, using fake solidarity to try and secure a place in my newly minted financial empire. She thought I would fall for the sisterhood narrative, forgetting that true sisterhood did not involve mocking someone while they stood freezing in a rainstorm. Terence nodded eagerly, stepping up beside his wife, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. She is right, Val. We were just under so much pressure with the investors. The crypto market is volatile, and I was terrified of losing the house. Mom put up for collateral. I panicked when I saw you crying in the rain. I should have brought you inside. I should have given you the guest room. I am your brother and I failed you. Please, Val, just give us a chance to make it right. We can start over, build a real relationship. You always wanted us to be close. Right now is our chance to unite the family. Brenda, seeing an opening, immediately launched back into her religious manipulation. She clasped her hands together, bowing her head slightly as if she were standing at the pulpit. The good Lord teaches us that 70 times 7 is how often we must forgive our flesh and blood. Brenda preached, her voice carrying that familiar, sickeningly sweet cadence. You have been blessed with an absolute miracle today, Valerie. God has poured $150 million of favor onto your life. He did that so you could be the anchor for this family. The Lord placed you in this position of immense wealth so you could uplift your brother in his time of need. He tested you last night to see if you would hold on to anger or choose grace. And I know my beautiful stepdaughter will choose grace. I sat at the table, resting my chin on my hands, letting Brenda dig her own grave with her fake righteousness. How much uplifting does Terence need exactly? Brenda, I asked, my voice perfectly flat, completely ignoring the theological guilt trip. Brenda's eyes lit up with unadulterated greed, the fake sorrow vanishing instantly to reveal the calculating opportunist. Underneath, well, Terence's venture is on the verge of a massive breakthrough, Brenda explained, rushing her words in her excitement. He just needs a small bridge loan to secure the infrastructure and keep the investors from pulling out. $5 million would completely save his company. Valerie, $5 million is barely a drop in the bucket. For you now, it is essentially pocket change, but it would secure your brother's legacy and keep this family from losing our home. You owe it to your father's memory to protect his namesake. Your father would roll over in his grave if he knew you let his house go into foreclosure when you had the means to save it with a simple wire transfer. I stared at the three of them standing in the cramped hallway of the apartment they had all mocked just hours ago. Julian was still holding his pathetic, drooping roses, his face a mask of sweating desperation. Ashley was still forcing out fake sniffles, burying her face in Terence's shoulder. And Brenda was actively trying to extort $5 million from the stepdaughter she had left to freeze in a storm. The absolute lack of shame was a spectacle to behold. They really believed I was still the accommodating scapegoat, the woman who would sacrifice her own sanity to keep the peace. They thought my silence over the years was submission, when in reality, it was merely observation. I had been taking notes on their greed for a decade, and they were completely oblivious to the trap they had walked into. The sheer audacity of their sudden arrival and their coordinated lies hung heavy in the air. Malik stood rigid by the door, his massive frame blocking any chance they had of stepping foot inside his home. He looked back at me, his eyes narrowing as he waited for my cue to physically remove them from the premises. But physical removal was far too easy for what they had done to me. I wanted them to see exactly how thoroughly their facade had crumbled. I wanted them to taste the absolute failure of their manipulation. I slowly stood up from the dining table, the wooden legs scraping against the faded carpet. Malik stepped aside, letting me walk right up to the threshold of the open door. The cold air from the hallway hit my face, but the fire burning in my chest kept me perfectly warm. I did not yell, I did not curse. I simply reached into the pocket of my oversized hoodie and pulled out my phone, turning the screen brightness all the way up. You want to talk about misunderstandings? Ashley? I said, tapping the screen, bringing up my security application. You want to talk about Christian charity? Brenda, and you want to talk about tests of true love? Julian, let us review the actual facts of last night. Let us see how much grace and sisterhood you were projecting when you thought I had negative $3 million in the bank. I pressed play on my phone screen, holding it up so all four of them could clearly see the high-definition video playing back. The footage had been captured by the expensive digital doorbell camera I had installed on Brenda's house 2 years ago to keep her safe from package thieves. The camera automatically backed up to my personal cloud account, an account none of them had access to or even remembered existed. The audio was crystal clear, echoing through the quiet apartment hallway, painting a vivid picture of their absolute depravity. The video showed me standing on the porch completely soaked and shivering. The recording captured Brenda pushing Ashley back inside and hissing, "Valerie, you are going to ruin everything," taking a step back as if my sudden misfortune was a contagious disease. The audio played Brenda's exact cruel words. "You chose your path. You chose to prioritize your precious business over your husband, and now you are paying the price. The Lord teaches us that pride goes before a fall, and I refuse to let your toxic negative energy infect the blessings that are finally coming to my son." The footage then cut to Ashley stepping out, sipping her wine and delivering her venomous monologue. "There is a reason I stay home and support Terrence. A real woman knows how to be submissive, how to uplift her husband instead of competing with him. Maybe, if you had paid more attention to Julian, you would not be standing on our porch in the rain, trying to buy a thrift store business suit with a crumpled $50 bill." And finally it showed Terrence shoving the money at my chest, ordering me to take an Uber to the slums, looking at me with pure unadulterated disgust, before slamming the heavy oak door in my face, leaving me in the freezing rain. Brenda's face turned an ashen gray as the undeniable proof of her cruelty played back in high definition, capturing every hypocritical word she had spoken. Ashley stopped her fake crying instantly, her mouth dropping open in horror as her racist microaggressions echoed down the cheap hallway of Malik's apartment building. Terrence looked like he was going to be sick. The irrefutable evidence of their utter lack of humanity was staring them right in the face, stripping away every single lie they had just tried to feed me, destroying the fragile narrative of family unity they had come here to exploit. "You did not misunderstand anything," I said, lowering the phone, my voice ringing with absolute finality. "You saw a woman you thought was broken, and you took absolute pleasure in kicking her while she was down. You thought my money was gone, so you threw me away like garbage. You used your religion to justify your cruelty, Brenda, and you used your fake Southern charm to mask your bigotry. Ashley, you are all completely morally bankrupt, and I will not give you a single dime to save a house that you locked me out of." I turned my gaze to Julian, who was shrinking back against the hallway wall, the roses trembling violently in his hands, his eyes darting frantically, looking for an escape route that did not exist. "And you, Julian?" I continued, reaching into the back pocket of my jeans and pulling out a folded piece of thick legal paper. "You wanted a clean break. You wanted to be entirely untethered from my assets before the creditors came knocking. You practically begged me to sign that expedited divorce decree so you could keep your precious leased cars and your custom furniture. You called me a sinking anchor and demanded I get out of your sight." I unfolded the document, holding it up so the embossed seal of the Fulton County Family Court was clearly visible in the dim light. The receipt timestamp was printed in bold black ink, right across the top. 8:00 a.m. Julian's eyes widened in sheer panic as he read the timestamp, his lips moving silently as he tried to process the catastrophic reality of that exact minute. He shook his head slowly, a low moan escaping his throat as the realization hit his arrogant mind. "My lawyers filed the electronic paperwork the very second the court opened this morning." I explained, my voice dropping to a harsh, victorious whisper, which happened to be the exact same minute the $150 million acquisition went public. "You locked me out of $40,000 in a joint checking account, Julian, and in your arrogant, desperate rush to abandon me, you voluntarily, legally, and permanently waived your right to a $75 million marital payout. The judge has already signed the expedited order. The ink is completely dry. We are officially divorced, and you get absolutely nothing. You threw away half of an empire because you were too stupid to read a financial disclosure. Julian's knees buckled. He dropped the bouquet of red roses. They hit the floor, scattering bruised petals across the dirty linoleum. He let out a choked, agonizing sound, grasping at his chest as if he was having a heart attack, sliding down the wall until he sat on the filthy floor. The sheer financial devastation of his own stupidity crushing the air out of his lungs. He stared at the divorce decree in my hand, his entire future evaporating into nothingness. Terence, seeing Julian collapse, immediately pivoted his desperation, mutating into raw, uncontrolled rage. The fake brotherly love vanishing as he realized the $5 million bridge loan was never going to happen. He pointed a shaking finger at me, stepping forward aggressively until Malik shoved him back. "You cannot do this, Valerie. You have a moral obligation to help this family. I put Mom's house up for collateral. If you do not give me that money, we are going to be living on the street. You are a billionaire now. You are just being a selfish, vindictive person who has forgotten where she came from. You owe us that money." Before Terence could finish his sentence, before Brenda could launch into another fake prayer, begging for divine intervention, and before Ashley could attempt another pathetic apology, a sharp, piercing sound interrupted the chaos. Julian's phone began to ring loudly from his suit pocket, a loud, obnoxious corporate ringtone that cut through the heavy tension. A second later, Terence's phone erupted with a frantic chiming sound. Then Brenda's phone joined the chaotic chorus echoing through the cramped space. The sudden simultaneous ringing froze all four of them in their tracks, their faces draining of whatever color was left. The anger on Terence's face morphed into stark terror. They scrambled to pull their devices from their pockets and purses, staring down at the caller IDs flashing on their screens. The final act of their complete and utter destruction had just arrived. Their karma was calling, and it was demanding immediate payment. Julian was the first to react, his hands shaking violently as he pulled his phone from his pocket. The screen displayed the name of his managing partner, Mr. Thornton, the very man who had screamed at him less than an hour ago. Julian answered the call, putting it on speaker in his panic, hoping that whatever Mr. Thornton was calling about would somehow miraculously fix the catastrophe he had created. "Yes, Mr. Thornton?" Julian answered, his voice cracking pathetically. "I am dealing with the situation right now. I am going to get her to tear up the divorce papers." Mr. Thornton's voice blasted through the speaker, cold and merciless. "There is nothing left to deal with, Julian. You are fired effectively immediately. Your security badge has been deactivated, and security is currently packing your office into a cardboard box." Julian's eyes bulged. "Fired? But I am your top director. I bring in millions. You brought in a liability," Mr. Thornton roared through the phone. "Our biggest client, the mega corporation that just bought your ex-wife's company, called me personally 5 minutes ago. Valerie is now sitting on their executive board, and her very first directive as a board member was to enforce a strict conflict of interest clause. She demanded your immediate removal from all accounts, citing gross unethical behavior and a complete lack of financial literacy. The client explicitly stated that if you are still employed by this firm, by the end of the day, they will pull their entire billion-dollar account." Julian's jaw dropped, the color draining from his face completely. "You cannot fire me for a personal matter," Julian pleaded, desperation leaking into every syllable. "You are firing me because I got divorced." "I am firing you because you are an absolute idiot." "Julian," Mr. Thornton snarled, "you literally handed a $150 million asset away because you were too lazy to read a bankruptcy filing. You are a public relations disaster, walking around in a cheap suit. Do not ever contact this firm again." The line went dead before Julian could even process the magnitude of the hit. His phone immediately vibrated again, this time showing a call from his mother, Sylvia. He answered it on speaker too. Stunned to change the setting, Sylvia's voice was screeching on the other end, hysterical and shrill. "Julian, what is happening? My black card was just declined at Neiman Marcus. They cut up my card right in front of the entire store. The bank told me the corporate accounts tied to your wife have been permanently closed. You told me she was bankrupt. You told me you protected our assets. She is not bankrupt. Mother Julian cried out, tears of genuine panic finally welling in his eyes. She just sold her company for $150 million and she cut off every single line of credit we had. We have absolutely nothing. The sound of Sylvia's hysterical sobbing echoed through the cramped hallway. A sharp contrast to her haughty arrogance from the night before. She had prided herself on being part of the Atlanta elite, funding her luxurious lifestyle on the back of my success. And now she was standing in a high-end department store, humiliated and entirely broke. Terrence, who had been listening to Julian's dual destruction, felt his own phone vibrate intensely against his thigh. He pulled it out, staring at a series of terrifying alerts lighting up his screen. The notifications were not from a bank. They were formal electronic notices from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Terrence stared at the words, his chest heaving as the reality of his own actions finally caught up to him. "What is it?" Ashley demanded, grabbing his arm roughly. "What is on your phone?" Terrence could barely speak, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "They know they found the money." Brenda stepped forward, panic overriding her fake Christian persona. "Who knows, Terrence? What money?" Terrence looked up at me, his eyes wide with absolute horror. "Valerie, what did you do?" "I didn't do anything, Terrence," I said calmly, crossing my arms. My acquiring company simply ran a standard compliance audit on every single piece of software integrated with my payment gateway. Apparently, your brilliant digital currency platform was nothing more than an elaborate Ponzi scheme. You were using my proprietary API to illegally launder money, thinking I was too distracted by the restructuring to notice the audit flagged. Your fraudulent transactions frozen all the accounts and automatically forwarded the entire file to federal authorities. You are looking at federal wire fraud charges, Terrence, and there is a digital paper trail leading directly to your laptop. Ashley's face contorted in shock, her hands flying to her mouth. "Wait!" she shrieked, looking at Terrence. "What about the house? What about the investors?" "The investors are gone, Ashley," I informed her coldly. "And the house, the one Brenda so proudly kicked me out of last night, Terrence used that property as collateral for his fraudulent business loans. The bank has already initiated foreclosure proceedings. Your sanctuary is gone, Brenda. You will be lucky if they don't seize your personal assets to cover the damages." Brenda let out a loud, wailing cry, dropping to her knees on the dirty carpet of the hallway, grabbing Terrence's pant leg. "My house," she sobbed loudly, the tears ruining her carefully applied makeup. "Terrence, tell me she is lying. Tell me you did not lose the house." Terrence was hyperventilating, staring blankly at the FBI notifications blinking on his screen. Ashley, realizing that the wealthy lifestyle she had married into was completely obliterated, backed away from Terrence in sheer disgust. She looked at the man she had sworn to submit to seeing nothing but a criminal who was about to drag her down with him. She grabbed the diamond engagement ring off her finger, the one I suspected was bought on credit, and threw it hard against Terrence's chest. The ring bounced off his suit jacket and rolled under a dusty radiator. "You are a pathetic loser!" Terrence Ashley screamed. Her fake Southern charm entirely evaporated. "I am not going to prison for your stupid little scams. I am filing for divorce today. Do not ever contact me again." Ashley turned on her heel and stormed down the hallway, leaving her husband sobbing on the floor next to his mother. Julian was still staring at his dead phone, his lucrative career and his luxurious lifestyle completely dismantled within a matter of minutes. The hallway was a symphony of their collective ruin. The wailing, the accusations, the desperate realization that their cruelty had engineered their own absolute destruction. I stood there watching the four of them unravel, taking in the sight of the people who had tried to break me, now completely broken by their own greed and stupidity. Malik stepped out from the doorway, holding my trash bag of belongings effortlessly in one hand. The heavy front doors of the apartment building opened down the hall, and a towering man in a sharp black suit stepped inside. He walked briskly down the corridor, stopping a few feet away from the chaos. He looked directly at me, his posture perfectly straight. "Mrs. Valerie?" he said, his voice clear and professional. "Your car is waiting outside." I nodded, stepping past the weeping figures on the floor. I did not offer them a single word of comfort. I did not hand them a single dollar bill. I walked out of the dingy apartment building into the bright morning sunlight. Malik walking tall right beside me, parked at the curb. Gleaming in the sunlight was a massive chauffeur-driven Maybach, its tinted windows reflecting the city skyline. The driver opened the rear door and I gestured for Malik to get in first. "Where are we going?" Malik asked, sliding into the plush leather seat, looking around the luxurious interior with wide eyes. "We are going to the new corporate headquarters," I said, stepping in after him and settling into the soft leather Malik. "I need someone I can absolutely trust to manage the infrastructure of $100 million enterprise. I am officially appointing you as the director of facilities. Your starting salary is $300,000 a year, and you are getting your own commercial fleet." Malik's jaw dropped, a massive grin spreading across his face as the driver gently closed the heavy door. The car engine purred to life, silent and powerful. I pressed a button on the armrest, rolling the tinted window down just an inch, taking one last look at the scene unfolding on the sidewalk. Julian had stumbled out of the building, looking completely lost. Brenda and Terrence were following behind him, arguing loudly, their voices carrying across the pavement. They were tearing each other apart, their fake alliances crumbling under the pressure of their monumental failures. They had always told me I was a failure. They had always insisted that I did not know how to hold on to the things that mattered. They told me my ambition was toxic, that my working-class roots would ruin me. But as I watched them standing in the dirt, clutching their empty hands, I realized they were only half right. I did not know how to hold on to toxic relationships. I did not know how to hold on to people who only valued me for my bank account. I threw those things away, deliberately, ruthlessly, letting the dead weight fall behind me to make room for a real empire. I pressed the button, rolling the tinted window up entirely, cutting off the sounds of their misery. The Maybach pulled smoothly away from the curb, merging into the busy morning traffic, carrying me toward a future that was entirely my own. The screen faded to black, leaving behind the absolute silence of a perfect, flawless victory. The most powerful lesson from this story is that true family is not defined by blood or marriage, but by absolute loyalty. During your darkest moments, when people show you their true colors during your struggles, you must believe them. Do not sacrifice your peace or shrink your ambition to fit into environments that only value you for your financial utility. Sometimes the universe removes toxic people from your life by disguising a massive blessing as a painful betrayal. Walking away from those who do not respect you is not a failure. It is the ultimate victory and the very foundation of building your true empire. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your own peace? Share your experience in the comments below, and do not forget to like and subscribe for more empowering stories of ultimate karma and success.